Inflation in Australia seems to just keep getting worse. CPI inflation hit yet another 40-year high, coming in at 7.3% year-on-year, up from 6.1% in the prior reading. This is clearly not good news for the RBA. The RBA is trying to keep a lid on inflation. However, with inflation continuing to increase, the RBA will need to increase rates by more and keep them higher for longer. And these higher rates are not going to be great news for the property market, putting more pressure on existing homeowners and making it more difficult for future homeowners to go out and borrow to buy a house. So let's have a look at what is going on with the inflation data and what exactly is driving it. Well, the inflation is relatively broad-based, but it is particularly strong within the non-discretionary sector. Non-discretionary items had the greatest increases in prices, increasing 8.4% year-on-year, or 2% quarter-on-quarter. By contrast, with discretionary items, these increased only 5.5% year-on-year, or 1.7% quarter-on-quarter. So clearly inflation has spread throughout the economy, but it is impacting some things, particularly non-discretionary things, by even more. We can also look at the areas where inflation was especially pronounced. Now overall, headline CPI increased 1.8% quarter-on-quarter. However, key highlights, or lowlights depending on your perspective, would include food, that was up 3.2%, housing, also up 3.2%, reflecting increases in rents as they start to normalize back toward their pre-pandemic levels, and also furnishings and household equipment went up 2.8%. Indeed, most things increased over this last quarter. However, some things decreased. They would include clothing and also transport. Clothing decreased 0.2% and transport 0.4%. However, these small decreases pale in comparison to the increases across many of the other areas in which people are spending their money. We can also look at inflation across the capital cities. And here, prices increased across the board other than in Perth. So, for example, in Sydney, prices increased 2.3% quarter-on-quarter. In Melbourne, 2.1%. In Adelaide, 2.6%. Many of the capital cities experienced inflation readings around that 2% area. If you were to annualize this would imply an inflation reading of around 8% over the year if you just multiply this out throughout the 4 quarters. Now, clearly there would be quite some volatility, meaning we won't necessarily have an inflation of 8% across the year. However, a 2% quarter-on-quarter reading is clearly not ideal. The only capital city to experience some decrease here was Perth, with prices decreasing 0.5%. So what then does this mean for the RBA? Well, it means the RBA is likely to increase rates potentially by more than some people had hoped for. For example, the RBA might in fact increase rates by another 50 basis points over the next couple of meetings, taking the cash rate up to 3.6% from the 3.1% that it is at the time of recording. This is a little bit unfortunate, because some were hoping the RBA might pause at its next meeting and potentially only increase by another 25 basis points at most before the RBA starts to move toward cutting rates. That doesn't appear to be on the horizon right now. So how then would this affect the economy more broadly? Well, clearly inflation is not great for consumers. Inflation makes it more difficult for consumers to go out and spend to buy pretty much anything, because now everything costs more, and inflation is running at a rate above the growth in wages, meaning that people's real spending power is decreasing. This itself reduces the ability of people to go out and buy a property. But then you add on to this the impact of the central bank, in particular the RBA here. With the RBA keeping rates higher for longer, it is going to perhaps put a damper on economic growth. It will almost tautologically reduce companies' ability to grow in the economy, because now the cost of capital is higher, so therefore companies are going to be less able to grow. Furthermore, it will make it more difficult for people to go out and buy a house, and or refinance existing houses, and or use equity in an existing property to purchase a new property. And with many people facing a mortgage rate cliff, many people facing the prospect of going from fixed rates to variable rates, the potential prospect of even higher rates than some had hoped for is clearly not good news for existing borrowers. All this means that we're not likely to see significant house price growth, at least in the near future. Nevertheless, that's what's going on with inflation. If you think I've missed anything, or if you've got any thoughts about the inflation data, let me know that in the comments below. And otherwise, hopefully I see you for future videos as well.